Hello and welcome to the Lockdown Defense. I'm Coach Mike, and today we are breaking down Dort and how this undrafted rookie has become known as a Harden-Stopper and one of the premier defenders rising in the NBA.
Oh man, what a defensive play. Tremendous defense. Wow.
The first thing we always like to look at is their defensive stance, and although Dort changes from upward to forward stances, for the most part he's in a very classical defensive stance. But instead what sticks out more at first glance is the activity of his feet and the activity of his hands. By pairing his constant changing of foot angles with his disruptive hands, the offensive player is going to find it very disorienting because the reads keep on changing. But when looking deeper, there seems to be a very unique reason why getting by Dort is so difficult, and I'm calling it a contact slide. Unlike most defenders who slide backwards or at an angle in response to an attack, Dort slides lateral or even at the attacking player, sliding into contact and making the opponent hit a wall. In these clips, you can even see him sticking his knee out into the offensive player's attack. Perhaps a dirty tactic, but he's trying to win a battle of foot position and do anything to impede an opponent's ability to get by him. But at the core, he's seeking early contact, and despite what's happening with the lower body, he's showing his hands and taking contact to the chest. This is something I've never seen done so consistently, and of course one of the reasons it's so effective for him is the explosiveness in his lateral slide, exploding to create that contact into the offensive player. And if it doesn't work, Dort is great at transitioning right into a turn and run to recover. You can see in these clips, he recognizes he's beat early and immediately breaks his defensive stance into a turn and run, trying to cut off Harden's path to the basket. And again in this clip, Harden beats his top foot and immediately breaks into a turn and run, aiming for a spot he thinks he can intersect Harden's path to the basket. It's quite logical. You're much faster when you're running than when you're sliding. And so if you're beaten, your best choice is to aim for a spot and try and cut the opponent off. Now there's two things that make Dort so effective at the turn and run. And first, it's how fast and explosive his crossover step is. And that's when one foot crosses over and in front of the other foot, usually transitioning into a turn and run, or to cover more ground. And the second thing that makes his turn and run so effective is his ability to stay square with his upper body while his lower body is turning and running. This allows him to appear in a legal guarding position, showing his hand and taking the contact in the chest, while actually being in a running stance below. And whether he's using the turn and run, a crossover step, or a contact slide, the main reason he's able to be so physical and avoid so many fouls is the concept of catching it with the chest. This is a coaching term that allows Dort to avoid fouls and play such smothering defense. As we've seen on the perimeter, he's great at initiating that first contact with his chest. But when it comes to battling a drive, he has to avoid picking up fouls. And so he's going to absorb that contact with the chest, drawing the offensive player into his body. And that lack of contact really throws off offensive players expecting and seeking out that physical counter, sometimes appearing like pulling the chair out. But with Dort, it allows him to use his wingspan to also suffocate his opponents, which is a great way to counter James Harden's seeking out contact and ability to draw fouls when he drives to the rim. But that's not the only reason that makes James Harden one of the best offensive players in the league. It's also his shooting ability from the perimeter. Now, it's always going to be hard to attribute the real cause of a missed shot, but it seemed Dort was having success affecting Harden's shot. And there was consistency to how Dort was challenging them. First and foremost, he was challenging at the point of release. which is making sure your contest is at the point or higher of the actual release point of the shooter. The other fundamental Dort used was having an early hand before the shot. This early hand sometimes even discouraging a shot from being taken at all. And then there was something very unique. Dort would violently swipe down during the contest. It's hard to attribute a real cause to why this was effective, but by combining all three of these techniques, Dort was clearly able to affect James Harden's shooting percentage. But as we know, the entire game isn't one-on-one, and Dort needed to execute all these principles against various actions, especially the pick and roll. And it seemed like OKC's main coverage was going to be going under the picks while living with pull-up threes behind the ball screens. Now of course you're picking your poison when trying to figure out a coverage to use against James Harden, but by going under, it allowed Dort to have better angles at cutting Harden's drives off, eliminating excessive help and rotations on James Harden's drives, and of course living with one-on-one opportunities from it, or having to rely on Dort's ability to contest from behind the screen, which of course didn't always work, but perhaps that's still better than Harden's ability to turn the corner and find teammates driving to the rim, and of course his ability to draw fouls in the ball screen. This also allowed OKC not to switch and keep the Dort-Harden matchup, which is why I was a little surprised we didn't see more screens set by Harden and popping, putting more pressure on Dort and putting him in longer closeouts. But of course they won the series, and I'll trust D'Antoni when it comes to the offense. And OKC did switch up their ball screen coverage every so often, but it was clear this was their base: go under and live with the matchup of Dort versus James Harden. And that was one of the beauties about this series. We got to see Dort glued to James Harden almost the entire time. And for the brief moments Dort wasn't on Harden, we still got to see his fantastic off-ball defense, his willingness to sacrifice his body to take charges, on or off the ball, his great activity and reads in the passing lanes, and his defensive positioning off the ball, always in the right spot to help and rotate. And like any great defender, a relentless effort level, and he even leads the league analytically in defensive effort. A willingness to dive on the floor. He's always coming out of nowhere, and he's never giving up on a play. Put all these things together and you get Lu Dort, someone who went from undrafted rookie to a Harden-Stopper and one of the rising premier defenders in the NBA, who is quickly one of my favorite and most unique defenders to watch. As always, I'm Coach Mike with Lockdown Defense. Keep up the hard work.